The 6,573rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. As this is the first meeting of the Council for the month of July 2011, I should like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency Mr. Nelson Messon, Permanent Representative of Gabon, for his service as a President of the Security Council in the month of June 2011. I'm sure I speak for all members of this Council in expressing deep appreciation to Ambassador Messon and his delegation for his great diplomatic skill with which he and the team conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is, it's a long title, International Tribunal for the Prosecution of Persons Responsible for Serious Violations of International Humanitarian Law committed in the territory of Rwanda and Rwandan citizens responsible for genocide and other such violations committed in the territory of neighboring states between 1st January 1994 and 31st of December 1994. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2011/410, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Portugal. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2011/329, a letter dated 20th of May 2011 from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the Security Council. It is my understanding that the Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2011/410 please raise their hand? The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 1995 from 2011. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its considerations of the item on its agenda. The Security Council will remain seized of the matter. The meeting is adjourned. The 6,574th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Afghanistan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Afghanistan, Canada, Japan, Pakistan, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. Under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Staffan de Mistura, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, to participate in this meeting. Under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the acting head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Pedro Serrano, to participate in this meeting. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2011/381, the report of the Secretary General on the situation in Afghanistan and its implication for international peace and security. I shall now give the floor to Mr. Staffan de Mistura. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. honorable members of the Security Council, Ambassador Tanin, dear friend. Last time, as you know, I insisted against the rules to actually allow Ambassador Tanin to speak first as a sign of attention and respect to the growing need for the Afghan people to be recognized as a sovereign country in any way. But this time, Ambassador Tanin has insisted with me to actually go back to the rules to show that Afghanistan intends to stick to international rules. And therefore, with your permission, Ambassador Tanin, I will then apply the old approach and take the floor as you kindly request me to do. We meet today at the moment of a special crossroad, because July is a particular month of 2011 when, in fact, there has been decisions related to the beginning of transition. Transition has been announced, but is also going to be based on the decision taken at the last meeting of the international community with the Afghan authorities starting around the middle of July. It is also the month where we have been starting to see the implementation, which will be gradual, of the decision and the speech of President Obama regarding a gradual redeployment of international forces, in particular those of the US. In other words, a crossroad between national sovereignty and that comes with responsibility, accountability, between continuing conflict and political inclusive dialogue. So first of all, transition. Transition is like a train, and it is moving forward. And according to every indicator I have, and we have been hearing it also in this meeting we had on the transition conference in Kabul, it is also on track. Of course, it's going to be addressing 7 areas, provinces, cities. We are going to see, as usual, the devil in the detail, but it is on track. The issue in which we are working, and we should be working more on, and has been recognized in that meeting, is that transition cannot be and should not be only security. It has to be something more. It needs to be a transition to something that the Afghan people recognize and identify with. That's why we are working together in order to ensure that there is also a socio-economic and, frankly, human rights aspect linked to the transition. And in that sense, while the transition is irreversible and doesn't go back like a Swiss train, but at the same time, we need to make sure that it becomes solidly reversible with that socio-economic aspect. In that context, one aspect that has been discussed in the past few days and may come up is the idea of seeing whether we could have some of those projects that may come up related to transition linked to some type of transition dividend. In other words, there will be some savings on the military side, undoubtedly. Some of it may be reutilized in order to promote and ensure that the Afghan local authorities and the Afghan people in the areas which are being transitionalized will be feeling that there will be a continuing interest, substantive support to the development of those. UNAMA will do its part. Based on the mandate that is very clear on it, UNAMA will do its part in facilitating particularly that aspect of the transition. That leads me to the second point, which is normally the first one in Afghanistan, security. The security situation, as you know, has been recently, and there's been a lot of reminders, an issue of concern. But we have to look at it into context, and God knows if I don't do that with care and caution, having ourselves gone through a tragic moment just on the 1st of April. There have been attacks in the Intercontinental Hotel. Many of us have been there. We know the iconic value of the Intercontinental Hotel, and it was shocking. There's been attack inside the city, inside the hospital, military hospital. There's been even in the Ministry of Defense. There's been attacks in Kandahar for 2 days, in Herat at the Italian PRT. But, let's put it into context, all the attacks were taken care of, perhaps sometimes in a rather confusing way because we are all in the process of training, but in an effective way by the Afghan military and police. Even at the Intercontinental Hotel, the end of the attack was in a way supported by the ISAF helicopters. But it was again the Afghan forces up front. I think that's an important point because we are in the security situation in a perception of an improvement, which is true. There has been a surge, there has been an improvement in the perception of the momentum being reversed. It's also true, however, that on the anti-government forces, there is a constant attempt during the spring offensive, as they call it, and the summer, to try to reverse that perception by giving signals of surgical, dramatic attacks. But so far, I must say, the first impression is still prevailing. The Afghans have been able to handle it. Doesn't mean in the next few weeks, months perhaps, the summer is not over, that the security the situation may not have moments of great difficulty. That's why it's so important, one, to address the issue of civilian casualties that is affecting the Afghan people, and two, to actually go into the other phase, which is the one which has been indicated by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and recently also by President Obama, and certainly by President Karzai several times, in other words, a political surge. No military solution is envisageable in Afghanistan. Everybody recognizes it. Now we need to move more effectively into a political surge. That means reconciliation. Where are we on that? Well, there have been, and it is in the front of the eyes of everyone, a lot of contacts. Unfortunately, there have been also media leakages which have not been helping those contacts. But the need for a dialogue is clearly there, and we are getting indications that that will be resumed in a more concrete way very soon. Meanwhile, the UN is doing its part in close coordination with the Afghan authorities and the international stakeholders, but we are focusing only and specifically in what we are mandated to do and where perhaps we have the added value, which is confidence building measures. And they are important because they are the ones preparing for substantive discussion, which can only be done by the Afghans with the Afghans, where they will have to actually do what we always been saying, Afghan-led. But confidence building measures, especially at this stage, do matter. And they are including issues such as the fact of looking at civilian casualties and giving the chance to the Taliban, if they do want to be involved in it, to actually qualify and frankly do it with facts, not with words, reducing the tremendous impact that they are having negatively on the civilian population, especially in this last period. Second, I must say, and I know this is a personal judgment, but it is a judgment based on what has been also the perception by many in Kabul, the fact that the decision that you courageously took about making a split on the 1267 list between Al-Qaeda and Taliban is certainly an indicator in the right direction if we want to continue pushing for reconciliation. I give you one example. Some of the members of the High Peace Council, which is the ultimate authority, which we are referring to when there will be a substantive discussion, happens to still be on the list. And that's very difficult to manage if we are, as the UN and UNAMA, assisting them logistically and substantively, and trying to travel with them and bring them around in order to make sure that we have meetings. One area of confidence-building measure is certainly the possibility, let's call it, of a venue. Let's not call it an office, where eventually meetings could take place between the Taliban and the stakeholders, in particular the Afghan partners, without having a feeling of insecurity and of sufficient discretion. That's not yet there, but it is one of the areas. Let me add one additional one, which is the one which has been coming up in the last few weeks. It is about the education. If there is one area where the international community and the Afghan authorities should be proud of in terms of improvement after the departure of the Taliban, has been the education. 7 million children are currently enrolled and going to school. many of them girls. Now, we have been always watching what has been the tragic decisions during the Taliban rule regarding schools in general and girls in particular. And there are some indicators that they appear to be first sending messages, even publicly through the internet, that they might have learned that mistake. We hope it's not just a tactical decision, and that they are actually indicating their interest in not attacking schools. There's been some contradictions. Some teachers have been affected recently, but on the whole, our own research indicates that out of 400 schools newly established in certain areas which are clearly could be influenced by a Taliban presence, they have been having a reduction of attacks substantially. Minister Wardak has drawn my attention to it. We, together with UNICEF, will continue studying. If that is a trend, we will recognize it as a confidence-building measure, but it needs to be verified. There is one area which I think we need to refer to once we talk about reconciliation, and it is reintegration. Now, the institutional architecture is there, and you all have contributed substantially, some countries very substantially, to actually making sure that this is a real issue and well prepared. So far, there's been some traction, some momentum. More than 1,800 people have actually in the program. But challenges exist. First of all, it's clear, until real reconciliation takes place, it will be very difficult to see a major momentum. But having it ready there in order to attract and actually respond to possible changes is very important. And the proof is 1,800. We do have some concerns, and we are working on it, on how to make sure that in fact, there is sufficient vetting. I must share with you that one of the preliminary indicators of the attack in Mazar-e-Sharif indicate that 3 out of the 5 who actually violently and brutally killed my colleagues were actually ex-Talibans reintegrated. That shows, first of all, that we need to be very careful about the vetting, and B, that none of this is waterproof until there is a final reconciliation. Next point, reconciliation, yes, but without a regional context, they will never be totally sustainable. That's why we have been looking in the last few months with great satisfaction and interest at the substantial increase in bilateral, trilateral, multilateral meetings, from the Shanghai process to the several meetings taking place between the Afghan, Pakistani, and the US authorities, and the same applying thanks to the meetings taking place in Istanbul, where also Iran was included in addition to Pakistan and Afghanistan. We are therefore hoping and believing that the Istanbul meeting taking place on the 2nd of November will be quite an opportunity for this to be addressed. Now, there is, as you know, an international contact group. It is an informal group, but it's growing in its own impact and influence. And we had a very good meeting, a constructive meeting in Kabul. In that meeting, apart from other major issues related to transition, the minister, Deputy Foreign Minister Ludin, did come up with an initiative which we are planning to support, which is actually the initiative of trying to see whether at Istanbul we may have some sort of a stability understanding, something along the lines which was done in the Balkans some time ago or during the process of Helsinki. In other words, something in writing that reassures all sides about the stability mutually to reinforce. That, of course, would make more sense if there was also a mechanism to support it and a financial trust fund about regional incentives. All that may be on the book by Istanbul, but certainly we are seriously working with the Afghan authorities, Turkish authorities, and all participants, both of the region and beyond the region, to hopefully get something moving on that. There is no question that at the moment there are some clouds related to the regional understandings. But they are, like the one taking place currently on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, something that should not be overly dramatized and should be frankly left to the Afghan and the Pakistanis to discuss. They have been having recently very constructive and useful meetings, both in Islamabad and Afghanistan. And they will be neighbors forever. We will be there for a while, but they will be always there. So while we are looking with concern at these events, we are also hopeful that this type of bilateral discussion will be going in the right direction. There is another issue which is, of course, important in the context of the regional environment. It is the concern by some of the regional neighbors about the still non-clear ambiguity about the nature of the strategic pact or understanding that may be discussed between the Afghan authorities, in particular the US. Some countries have been very concerned about the possibility of permanent large foreign bases in Afghanistan. We've been trying to reassure everyone that, and there's been, that this does not really actually seem to be the case, and B, it is actually up to the Afghan authorities, and in particular to reassure the neighbors about the real nature of whatever would be this strategic agreement. But I do recognize, having traveled in the region, it is still an issue that would be hopefully better solved with clarity before Istanbul, hopefully. There have been statements by the US authorities very much in the right direction, trying even from the Pentagon at the highest level to reassure that type of aspect, but probably some additional homework will facilitate taking care of that cloud. That leads me to another issue, which is counter-narcotics. At the time of a possible gradual changes of focus by the international community in Afghanistan, there is a concern that the so-called economic environment will be changing. And that is proven by facts. The military reduction will also reduce the impact of all what is financially linked to a substantial military presence. And the fear is, by my colleagues in UNODC in particular, and I would like to draw your attention on it, that the narco economy may then become more appealing to some Afghans. And therefore, an important need for not forgetting that aspect, which, as you know, is affecting Afghanistan, but also, again, neighbors substantively so. That leads me to the human rights issue. If there is one area, dear members of the Security Council, where I believe the UN will be remembered in Afghanistan, is probably for its holding the fort, maintaining high the flag of the need of human rights respect. That's why the civilian casualties report is so important and has been a major irritant, frankly, to particularly the Taliban, who have been telling us many times that this is hurting them. And we have been telling them there is a way to avoid that, to not hurt civilians, frankly. Now, and that has also had an impact on the ISAF and NATO interventions, particularly by air raids. And I know that the errors which have been taking place have been increasingly being taken the attention and drawing the attention of the American and NATO authorities, whereas the horrors that Taliban have been doing in many places, such as the attack in a bank or recently in a hospital, have also been drawn to their attention, and they are annoyed by that. We hope that that will help everyone, but particularly Taliban, to actually understand that there is a moment when the popular support that they believe they have is being affected by the level of civilian casualties they are causing these days. Women issue is still a very important issue. We have 69 women in the parliament. We count on them to actually be able to defend also what has been achieved by women in Afghanistan. But the reports we are getting are still worrisome about the way, in fact, many cases are still leading to an aspect of concern, such as the judiciary sometimes punishing women when they are moving out of a home or not deciding to marry. The same thing applies, obviously, on the issue of children. There have been cases of children now being used as suicide bombers. There have been cases of children being attacked in a way that our own special representative of children in conflict have been drawing attention. On the humanitarian side, there is one area where I really need to draw your attention. The World Food Programme is having, at the moment, a difficulty of resources. They've been one of our own stars in trying to show to the Afghan people that we are not abandoning them in any time. And they've been actually providing food to more than 6 million children. At the moment, they have had to reduce their own number of beneficiaries substantially due to lack of resources. I'm drawing that because it is an important issue for all of us. Aid coherence. Well, it is crucial and it's still important that we recognize that aid coherence has a body for that, and it's called the JCMB. The JCMB is the best body. We don't need to invent new ones. In the UN, we are specialized in creating new bodies, so I would be very reluctant in suggesting one. But instead that we reinforce the JCMB. The JCMB has the possibility and the potential to actually do the aid coherence. But we do have a cloud, and the cloud is the Kabul Bank. I don't need to remind you about it, but it is an important issue which is in a way stopping for the moment progress on the JCMB and even the Kabul conference follow-up. It's not up to us, it's up to the IMF. IMF is engaged. To be fair to Minister Zakiwal, 8 out of the 10 indicators that were requested to be taken in order to reassure the international community and IMF have been addressed, but there are still 2. We hope, and we have been contributing to draw the attention of IMF on the possible consequences of an Afghan default, so to speak, which is not imminent if that is not approved, but is certainly a concern. And at the same time to the Afghan authorities that the Kabul Bank is a serious issue. $800 million is not something you can gloss over. And therefore, there is a serious attention at the moment. The same applies to the issue that you are very familiar with, the parliamentary crisis. We were hoping that that would not take place 10 months after the elections and 6 months after the president having solemnly inaugurated the parliament. And therefore, we would have been then going through an imperfect election, but with the Afghan institutions handling it and the politics going on. Unfortunately, this has not been the case. A special court has indicated that 61 MPs should perhaps leave their position. There is a current tension, as you know. Our position is the position of the Security Council, 22nd of December. We are not changing it. And the second position is that indeed the judiciary has the right to actually persecute anyone who has done criminal charges, but not to change the outcome of elections, and that the solution is an Afghan solution and needs to be a political solution, not a judiciary. We are hopeful and working on your behalf, together with the Afghan authorities, to avoid that this institutional crisis prolongs itself. Afghanistan needs check and balances, needs a parliament, and needs an executive, and needs a judiciary, and all of them working together. But at the moment, it is a cloud, but since I'm an optimist, I'm expecting no much rain yet on that. Last point on my side, with your permission, a message. This is a transition period in every sense, Mr. President and dear members of the Security Council. But there is a message that we need to make sure that the Afghans hear, that 2014 is not going to be 1989. They are worried, and rightly so, that for the third time after twice in their own history, they will be again graciously abandoned by the international community. I know that's not our intention, certainly not of the UN, of UNAMA. We are going to review our own footprint. We are review the way we are going to work, because transition is taking place everywhere. But we are going, if everything is there, and if the Afghans want us, to be there for a long time. And I think from the international point of view, we need to constantly reassure them about it. That will help them to go through this transition in this difficult period. End of my comments. Thank you.
Thank SRSG Staffan de Mistura for his briefing. And I now give the floor to the representative of Afghanistan. You have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to begin by congratulating you on your assumption of the presidency of the Council for the month of July. I would like also to appreciate your personal role and Germany's role, prime role, in dealing with Afghanistan and the Council. I would like to extend my warmest welcome to my good friend, SRSG Staffan de Mistura, back to the Council. I thank him for his kind remarks and compliments, for his comprehensive briefing, and for his introduction of the Secretary General's report. As the world has entered into a post-Bin Laden era, Afghanistan, the greatest victim of terrorism, is today at a critical juncture in its quest for peace and stability. Consistent with the outcome of the Lisbon Conference, we have begun the transition process. In the coming days, we will implement the first stage of this process in 7 Afghan provinces: Kabul, Panjshir, Bamiyan, and the municipalities of Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif and Balkh province, Metal-Lam and Laghman province, and Lashkar-Gah and Helmand province. Transition is a rousing call for Afghans to take the lead, for national ownership and leadership, and for the government of Afghanistan to assume its sovereign responsibilities. From our point of view, transition is a carefully formulated, comprehensive strategy which presupposes not only a gradual transfer of security responsibilities until the end of 2014 to Afghan authorities, but also a conscientious drawdown of international forces, the accelerated training of the Afghan army and police, the strengthening of governance, a new regional agenda for a multifaceted cooperation, and the prospect of securing a renewed strategic partnership with the United States and NATO. The Afghan government continues its crucial efforts to ensure that the process is smooth and viable. However, there should be no doubt for the transition process to sustain and succeed, certain preconditions must be met. First and foremost, we look to our international partners to expedite the training and equipping of our security forces and to provide them with necessary enablers. Mr. President, last month, President Obama announced the gradual drawdown of US forces from Afghanistan. We welcome the decision and consider it to be in accordance with the recent emerging consensus between Afghanistan and the international community to move from a primarily military engagement to a more solid and enduring partnership beyond 2014. President Obama's announcement is testament to, firstly, the steady ability of Afghan security forces, and secondly, the changed momentum of the war despite the recent vicious attacks by the Taliban. Contrary to some interpretations, we do not see the drawdown of international forces as an endgame or, as some put it, the beginning of international disengagement in Afghanistan. In the last 10 years, much blood and sweat have been shed and many sacrifices made in order to realize our common objective, lasting peace and security in the country and the region. Mr. President, the recent display of a promo-psychodrama of so-called sophisticated attacks, such as the one carried out last week in Kabul Intercontinental Hotel, or the slaughter of a dozen civilians in a hospital in Logar province, is a conspicuously well-orchestrated attempt by the enemies of Afghanistan designed to incite fear among people, to hinder the international support for Afghanistan, and to convince a war-weary audience in some countries that the war is unwinnable. Moreover, the recent campaign seeks to sabotage the future of peace talks and undermine the prospect of reconciliation. Those who provide terrorists and extremists with money, arms, and strategic guidance are equally responsible for the continued killing and brutal butchery of innocent civilians in Afghanistan. Therefore, it's imperative to underline the necessity of ending the sanctuaries that continue to produce and prepare the ruthless killers and agents of unending destruction of Afghanistan. However, Mr. President, acts of terror will not shake our determination for securing peace and stability in Afghanistan. We are pleased to see that an environment conducive for constructive outreach and dialogue with members of the armed opposition is now in place. The reconciliation process will be pursued as a matter of priority, consistent with the understanding that there is no purely military solution, and that transition requires an inclusive settlement. Reconciliation is aimed at bringing peace, prosperity, and unity to the country. It is not about ceding any territorial control or accommodating any representation outside of the authority of the Afghan government. The High Peace Council is engaged in discussions with the Taliban and the key actors in the region to end the violence and achieve a lasting peace. It's an effort in which all segments of the society, including women, are involved. In addition, we are beginning to equally focus on regional dimensions of the reconciliation process. We underscore again the significant role of Pakistan for a reconciliation in peace, and emphasize in this context the importance of constructive collaboration between two countries. We need to utilize necessary confidence-building measures for that collaboration to be continued. The recent armed violation of Afghanistan's eastern border through hundreds of shellings and artillery fire in Kunar and Nangarhar provinces, killing dozens of people, including women and children, have caused serious alarm and concern for the people and government of Afghanistan, and ran the risk of undermining the spirit of cooperation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We urge immediate cessation of such attacks. Mr. President, the Security Council's recent decision to separate the Taliban sanctions regime from that of Al-Qaeda was an astute move in support of our peace and reconciliation initiative. It provides new impetus to our Afghan-led reconciliation process. We also appreciate the Council's decision to meet our delisting requests, and we urge further focus for acceding to our additional requests which remain unmet. Mr. President, the recently held 11th meeting of the International Contact Group, ICG, on Afghanistan in Kabul, with broad participation from more than 50 countries and international and regional organizations, focused on reconciliation, regional cooperation, transition to Afghan leadership and ownership, and international support beyond 2014. This meeting was held in the lead-up to the upcoming conference in Istanbul, aimed at creating a stability compact, and the international conferences in Bonn later this year, which will review progress against the goals of transition, looking into the long-term support of the international community, and advancing the political process, including reconciliation and regional partnership. Mr. President, a decade of international and regional interaction in Afghanistan is leading to the emergence of a new Silk Road, defining the shared benefits of the regional cooperation. This year, we have engaged in an increasingly palpable collaboration with our neighbors in the region, expanding the horizon of understanding and the scope of joint efforts. With Pakistan, during last month's visit of President Karzai to Islamabad, a promising outlook for close cooperation in realization of common vision, not only for development, but also peace was envisaged. The visit was followed by an extensive discussion with the trilateral framework of the core group between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the United States, which recently held its third meeting in Kabul. During the latest visit of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, India extended its support for Afghan-led reconciliation efforts and announced a significant increase of assistance to Afghanistan. We also continue to have numerous exchanges with Iran, Russia, China, Central and South Asian countries, and the Arab world. The opportunities that a peaceful and stable Afghanistan can offer for the prosperity and security in the region are ever more evident. We will continue our constructive engagement with regional partners to realize our common goals. Mr. President, securing Afghanistan and its future is about empowering the country and enabling it to stand on its own feet and to take charge of its own destiny. In this regard, we look forward to the upcoming review of UNAMA's mandate as essential for aligning the UN's role with the evolving needs of transition. We are convinced that a more harmonized, streamlined, and coordinated UN based on one UN approach is vital for furthering the efficiency and effectiveness of the United Nations in Afghanistan. We look forward to lasting partnership with the United Nations during transition and beyond. Mr. President, the government of Afghanistan will continue to improve governance, enhance its fights against corruption, and strengthen transparency and accountability in our national institutions. To this end, we will build on existing measures to make sure that anyone involved in illegal activities will be held accountable. The Afghan government's recent apprehensions of two senior executives of Kabul Bank implicated for financial mismanagement is testimony to our firm commitment to accountability in rule of law. We have presented the Attorney General's office with a list of all accused individuals. A comprehensive investigation of Kabul Bank fiasco is underway, which should lead to restoration of debts and bringing all culprits involved in the case to justice. We are convinced that the final outcome of the investigation will meet both the concerns of Afghan people and our international partners. Mr. President, ongoing consultations are underway to resolve the dispute which arose from irregularities during our parliamentary elections. We are not facing a constitutional crisis. The government of Afghanistan is fully committed to resolving the issue within the framework of a legal and political solution. Mr. President, far too many innocent Afghans have lost their lives as a result of prolonged violence, insecurity, and fighting. Civilian casualties are not just about figures or numbers. It's about the loss of innocent life of men, women, children, village elders, health workers, teachers, and aid workers. The Taliban have primarily been responsible for such killings and display a total lack of conscience when pulling the trigger against innocent civilians or those who protect local people. However, the number of casualties caused by NATO forces, despite their own repeated calls for commitment to protect civilians, remains significant. We reiterate our call for an immediate end to civilian casualties. Mr. President, as we move forward, we must think beyond ending the war towards ensuring sustainable progress across all sectors: security, governance, and development. Our goal remains the vision of a peaceful, stable, democratic, and prosperous Afghanistan. For this to be achieved, we must build on the gains of the past and forge a feasible framework of cooperation with the region in a long-term partnership between Afghanistan and the international community. The coming years will be crucial for our joint success. Together, we be able to accomplish the task we began 10 years ago. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan, and I now give the floor to council members. The next speaker is the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Special Representative Stefan de Mistura for his briefing and for his outstanding work in very difficult conditions. I also thank Ambassador Zahir Thaning for his statement. Although the situation in Afghanistan has shown progress, the recent rise in security incidents are a painful reminder of the many challenges still ahead. Brazil is both saddened and alarmed by recent signs of hostility against the presence of the UN in Afghanistan. We condemn in the strongest terms the brutal attack on UNAMA. I take this opportunity to reiterate Brazil's confidence in the work of the UN in helping lay the foundations for sustainable peace and development in Afghanistan, and our support to the Afghan government in this period of transition. We welcome the security enhancement projects being implemented by UNAMA throughout the country. Brazil is also concerned with the rising civil unrest in Afghanistan. After several years of war and violence, the Afghan society should no longer endure the burden of war. The rise in conflict-related casualties should not be treated as a mere unintended consequence of the conflict. All concerned must continue to do their utmost to protect civilians and comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law. There can be no military solution to this conflict, and I think that we all agree on that. The Kabul process must be closely followed until transition to full Afghan leadership and responsibility is achieved. Despite the current difficulties, the transition towards Afghan security responsibility must continue to advance. In the same vein, the implementation of the national priority programs outlined by the Afghan government is essential to build the capacity and infrastructure that Afghanistan requires to promote its social and economic development as the international military presence draws down. In any scenario, reconciliation efforts remain central to a political solution of the conflict in Afghanistan. Dialogue is the path to a solid foundation for the future of Afghanistan. Brazil supports the implementation of measures agreed to at the Afghanistan Peace and Reintegration Program Review Conference. Through an enhanced presence in Kabul, Brazil stands ready to work together with the Afghan people and its government towards a future of peace and development. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of Brazil. And now I give the floor to the representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of my delegation, I would like to thank Mr. Stefan de Mistura for his comprehensive briefing and Ambassador Tanin for his declaration. Mr. President, we welcome the fact that the government of Afghanistan has continued to implement the Kabul process, including the successful elaboration of 11 national priority programs out of 22. We express our hope that the financing issues related to these programs will be successfully resolved in coordination with donors. The Afghan authorities now must show tangible results in other important national priorities, programs such as justice and sub-national governance, which are crucial for better function of the state. We would like to commend UNAMA for its important support to implementation of Kabul process. In respect of taking over the responsibility of the Afghan authorities for the security in the country, Bosnia and Herzegovina hopes that recent incidents in Kabul and other places will not have a negative impact on the transition which was announced in March by President Karzai and is supposed to start this month. We also took note of recent announcement by the US President, Mr. Barack Obama, followed by the UK and Germany, of partial withdrawal of the troops from Afghanistan. This means that the following period will be crucial for Afghanistan's future and for the assessment of the work which has been done by the international community over all these years. In this regard, we particularly welcome UNAMA's role in facilitating dialogue among development partners and ISAF to ensure that development perspective is taken into account in the transition planning. Another important element for Afghanistan's future is the Afghan-led reconciliation and reintegration process. It is encouraging to see that efforts to strengthen this process have continued to receive strong support from the international community, including the valuable work of the Special Representative and UNAMA. Furthermore, the adoption of the Resolution 1988 and establishment of the Taliban sanction regime also represent positive steps in support of reconciliation efforts. We reiterate our position that reconciliation and integration are crucial elements of the peace process. We fully understand that such a process can be very sensitive from the human and political aspects, and that, consequently, it has potential to meet diverse obstacles. However, despite these obstacles, we continue to believe that Afghan-led reconciliation and reintegration processes has no alternative and that it has to be priority in the future. The reported progress on the reintegration of insurgents is an encouraging sign, particularly because it includes Kandahar, which until now has not experienced significant progress in this field. Mr. President, although political development in Afghanistan continues to advance in the right direction, the security situation in Afghanistan remains the cause of our great concern. In particular, UN statistics shows that last May was deadliest for the civilians, which represent a significant increase compared to 2010. Bosnia and Herzegovina condemns in strongest possible terms the deadly attacks carried out on Logar Hospital on 25th June. It is simply not possible to justify such a crime against innocent civilians. We also condemn the recent attacks against a hotel in Kabul and reiterate our condemnation of the deadly attack against UNAMA compound in Mazar-e-Sharif, where 3 of UNAMA staff members were among other casualties. It is important to continue to call upon all parties to the conflict to strictly comply with their obligation under international humanitarian law and protect civilians, while strongly stressing that killing civilians and innocent people is a crime. Mr. President, as a direct result of the ongoing conflict, we have also witnessed a considerable increase in number of displaced persons. We share the Secretary General's view that conflict-related displacements and failure to provide reintegration support is not only a humanitarian issue, but an important security concern given its destabilization potential. The UN agencies have played a crucial role in supporting the return of Afghan refugees and displaced persons, as well as in sustainable reintegration of these persons. In this context, we should not forget the issue of removal of unexploded explosive devices, since only 27% of areas contaminated with mines had been cleared. We also commend the efforts of UNODC in addressing the problem of illicit drug production, which remains the lifeline for the anti-government forces and terrorists. We actively participate in Paris Pact protests as a part of the joint international efforts to suppress, if not severe, the drug trafficking that has a severe impact on the security of both the countries of supply and demand. Finally, we consider that all important issues for the sustainable peace and stability in Afghanistan can only benefit from the regional cooperation which implies its neighboring country, Iran, Pakistan, and India. We welcome reinforcement of the dialogue and cooperation. We also commend the efforts of Turkey aimed at supporting Afghan stability and economic development and forthcoming Istanbul Conference on Afghanistan on 2nd November 2011, as well as commitments made by Afghanistan neighboring countries, during the 4th Conference of Least Developed Countries in Istanbul to the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Afghanistan. In conclusion, our thanks go to Special Representative Mr. Staffan de Mistura, the staff of UNAMA, and all UN personnel in Afghanistan for their tireless and dedicated work. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, y permítame, en primer lugar, felicitarlo y desearle el mayor de los éxitos en este mes en que usted y su país asumen la presidencia del Consejo de Seguridad, a la vez que agradecerle al representante de Gabón, nuestro buen amigo Noel Nelson Mazone, que ha conducido con toda seriedad y ecuanimidad nuestros trabajos en el mes anterior. La bienvenida y el agradecimiento al representante especial del secretario general y jefe de la misión de asistencia de las Naciones Unidas en Afganistán, el señor Staffan de Mistura, y agradecerle su muy completa y seria presentación que nos ilustra con mucha claridad sobre los aspectos de la situación actual en Afganistán, los factores de su realidad que hay que tener muy en cuenta para el futuro y esas perspectivas en este proceso de transición y futura consolidación. Asimismo, darle la bienvenida al embajador Zahir Tanin. Quisiera en primer lugar también destacar la importantísima contribución de UNAMA en el mejoramiento del proceso de estabilización y democratización y su empeño en trabajar de manera coordinada con el gobierno para sentar las bases que permitan una paz sostenible y un desarrollo en Afganistán. Consideramos oportuno que, de acuerdo con su mandato, UNAMA se siga concentrando en dar apoyo al gobierno en aspectos críticos como facilitar el proceso político para la paz y la reconciliación, la seguridad, la gobernabilidad, el desarrollo económico y la cooperación regional. Mi delegación lamenta profundamente el aumento de los incidentes de seguridad y muy especialmente los ataques contra las instalaciones y el personal de Naciones Unidas que tuvo lugar el 1 de abril. Damos la bienvenida y respaldamos las actividades que adelanta el representante especial para mejorar la seguridad del personal, así como el compromiso del gobierno en continuar apoyando a UNAMA. No obstante, es preocupante la mayor frecuencia de las manifestaciones públicas contra la presencia internacional civil y militar. A esto debe prestársele la mayor atención. En el mismo sentido, encomiamos las actividades tendentes a la transición hacia una mayor responsabilidad y liderazgo afganos y que se continúe trabajando dentro del cronograma acordado para que las fuerzas afganas asuman el liderazgo en materia de seguridad según el cronograma hacia el año 2014, propósito que debe estar guiado por los avances sobre el terreno. En este